What's the best story you know about your dad? When I was a baby he burnt his eyebrows off cooking on a grill. It wasn't until I was in high school that my mom told me this story, and I laughed. And she was like, wait, nobody ever told you this before? And I was like, haha no, but why would they? And she just looked at me and was like, you never asked why your dad didn't have eyebrows? I had gone my whole life never realizing my dad didn't have eyebrows. In fact, I didn't believe her when she told me and thought she was just doing a stupid mom joke like I was still 7 or something. When we got home though I saw for myself, they just didn't grow back. As a consequence I can't no longer ever take him seriously. My dad tried to remove an underground yellow jacket nest in our backyard by setting it on fire. So, he pours some gas in while my mom watches from the kitchen window. This should have been enough, but no, he took it one step further by lighting a match, stepping away, and throwing it into the nest. Little did he know, the yellow jackets would have the last laugh. As their final moments approached, the ground burst open, sending not only dirt chunks flying, but releasing flaming yellow jackets which proceeded to chase my terrified father a good distance before finally succumbing to the flames. All while my mom laughed herself to tears in the kitchen. My mental images of Homer Simpson. My dad used to work for a railways company, so sometimes he would spend nights working in the middle of nowhere. One of those nights he met 2 guys wearing the company's uniform, but he didn't know them. They asked him for directions and my dad politely answered. When they were gone, police officers showed up and asked him if he had seen 2 men whose description matched with those guys he met. Turns out the guys had just escaped from prison, and my dad helped them. Him and his pals were 13 years old at the time and they got to talking about their respective adolescent love lives and who they're going to get when they're older. My pa had a girl in mind, a girl who he didn't even interact with on a relationship level yet, but a girl nevertheless. They decided to write down the name of their pick on a piece of paper each, and then one of them had to keep all of the pieces of paper for safekeeping. Fast forward 15 years and the game has been forgotten about. It's my parents' wedding day. As the car is leaving the chapel after the service, my pa's friend stops the car and hands in an envelope through the passenger window. Pa opens the envelope and it's the same piece of paper that he had written on 15 years ago with his now wife's name on it. It's pretty neat. When my dad first met my mom and asked her on a date he had a full 70s style mustache. When he picked her up for their first date he no longer had a mustache. He told my mom that he just didn't like having facial hair anymore. In reality he had burnt it off the night before taking flaming shots of tequila. Love that guy. I just don't like having facial hair anymore. I vastly prefer burn scars. I mentioned once to my parents how it was interesting that there was usually only one word for each food in English, but often 2 in Punjabi. I used cucumber as my example, called both kira and cucumber in Punjabi. They looked at me, confused, and told me that cucumber was an English word. When I denied that, my mum suggested it was the British way of saying it, since we'd learnt it like that from my British dad. No, he said, that's just how it's spelled, cucumber. My entire family spent 2 decades mispronouncing cucumber because my dad can't fricking spell. I am also a British Punjabi, and I've spent my entire life with 2 different names, because my dad spelled it wrong on the birth certificate. In college, my dad had an argument with an English professor over the subtext of a poem. A year later, that poet gave a lecture at his college. My dad worked backstage at the theater so got to hang out with the guy after. So my dad got the chance to ask, why did you put this verse in? What does it mean? And the poet said my publisher wanted it longer. As an English major this is giving me so many feels. Mostly amused disapproval because I have spent so many hours squeezing meanings out of stones. My father worked on the 68th floor of the World Trade Center and was at his desk on 9/11. He made it down the 68 floors to safety and received a medal from the mayor for helping people down. Many of his co-workers were not as fortunate. Amongst the dead was his boss. My father was given the promotion and all the benefits that come with it because his boss was killed. The boss wife was left a widow. The whole office came together and had a vote to pick someone to look after the widow. My father was chosen. He would take her out every single weekend for years following 9/11 for drinks. or to catch a movie, or have a nice dinner out. Basically anything to keep her mind off of her loss. My father never told me this story. In fact, he never even mentioned this lady to me. It was only a few months ago that my father's good friend told me. Whether it was out of guilt or a sense of duty, my father silently went about a morally upstanding act without spreading awareness of it. I believe this is something I could learn from. Your dad is a man's man. The ultimate selfless bro. If he's still alive, buy that great guy a beer for me. My dad was a general manager of a small manufacturing plant back in the 80s. They made foam packing products for industry. That stuff your television comes packed in. Foam coolers, wig heads, expandable polystyrene was the official name. What you may know as styrofoam, but that was the competition's product and styrofoam was a dirty word in my house growing up. Anyway, my dad was by all accounts a good boss. He treated his employees very well, and whenever some outside group would send in union ringers to try and organize the plant, the employees would kick them out. He kept his shop non-union by offering better pay and conditions than the union could. Then my dad died. Many years later, 17 to be exact. My mom went to a retirement party for one of the longest serving employees. She was sitting at a table with a bunch of old timers, and they were all swapping stories about my dad. About the time he bailed that one guy out of jail. About that time he bought Christmas presents for that one family who had hit hard times. About the fishing trips he used to take people on. All along, there was this one guy at the end of the table who got more and more agitated at every story. Eventually, he got up in a huff and stormed off. My mom asked, "So what's his problem?" They responded, "Oh, he's the new guy. He was hired on as the new manager after my father had died. Despite being in charge for 17 years, he was still the new guy and hated being compared with my dad." Your dad sounded like a really good man to be respected so much by his employees even after his passing. I just remember when I was a little kid, 7 or 8, I was in the backyard with him while he was constructing my swing set. He got the frame together and decided to move it across the backyard, and we have a pretty big backyard, so he just picked it up like it weighed nothing and carried it over. Looking back now, it couldn't have weighed more than 60 or so pounds, but in that moment, little kid me was so impressed. Like, that's my dad, he's cool. My dad has all manner of stories of shenanigans. The one that immediately comes to mind is from when he was in the army. When out on maneuvers during training, my dad always got picked to be the bad guy. His job was to basically frick with his own guys, flatten a Jeep tire or two, cut phone lines, etc. He developed a great trick involving fishing line and a rubber snake. Obviously, he would run the fishing line through the camps, across trails, etc. and then, at just the right moment, pull his big rubber snake around and scare the crap out of everyone. It got to the point where his fellow army dudes would not really even blink at seeing a rubber snake cruising through. It was played out. He took to stuffing big chunks of damp rope into the bottoms of sleeping bags, which just made the rubber snake thing work again. Everyone was spending so much time watching where they were walking so as not to be surprised by a fake snake. They wouldn't even see what the aggressors were up to. This was always just a story my dad would trot out on occasion, until I met a guy at a cafe. We got to talking about this and that, and he told me the story of the rubber snake and the absolute chaos that resulted. Obviously he had no clue who I was. In relation to the subject of the story, I was informed that my dad was a freaking evil genius by an independent party. Of course I came clean and explained who I was, and we had a good laugh. Too many to count, but my favorite is one of his pranks. My dad was doing something to the electrical box in the basement while my mom tended to other things upstairs. Cue him screaming bloody murder and flicking switches on and off. My mom ended up flying down the stairs with a 2x4 to smack him off of it. I'm surprised she didn't beat him with it anyways. I miss that man more than anything. When he was a kid, he was at a family reunion. He had just recently learned the phrase good riddance. He thought it was just another way to say goodbye. At the end of the reunion, he stood at the door telling people who left good riddance. My grandfather was not pleased. To this day, it's the one story about him that he is unable to keep a straight face when telling it. He once chopped a tree down with my uncle at the top. My brother chopped down a tree with me at the top, and it was not pleasant. A couple years into college, a girl he knew transferred to his school. He ran into her, and they talked a bit, and she asked, "So, what's a girl got to do to get a date around here?" 40 plus years later, my dad realized she was hinting that he should ask her out. Ladies, men are that dense. Your hints aren't obvious enough, no matter what you think. My dad played flute for the USAF band for a few years. During one performance, they are playing a song where the clarinet is supposed to play some fake Morse code. Well, the clarinet player and my dad wanted to have some fun with it, so my dad showed the clarinet player how to play something along the lines of "Please help, prisoner NGI band" in Morse code. Managed to get a few laughs out of the audience. Also, he and some band members apparently managed to get like 4 guys and a tuba in a convertible MG midget. Probably the story of his and my mom's first date. Back in 1975, my father asked my mother out on a date. They had known each other already because my dad's buddy dated her a few months prior. Yes, Pops got permission from his buddy. No bro code violation. Anyway, they are all drinking, smoking weed, having a great old time. My mother, at the time, used to suffer from extremely bad cramps and would often pass out from the pain. Well, this happened that evening while they were at a party. My dad thinks she is on something and refuses to listen to her when she tells him to give her a shot. The booze would ease the pain, a technique she had done countless times in the past. Well, dad doesn't listen, so mom passes out. My father had to bring her home to her parents from their first date, unconscious, and carrying her in his arms. When my grandpa opened the door, my dad was already mentally prepared for the verbal, and likely, physical abuse that he was about to endure. But my grandpa just smiled at him, said hello and thank you for returning her, and that he looks forward to seeing my dad again. My dad just stands there for a minute completely dumbfounded. I like that he was thanked for returning her, like they'd already lost 3 grandchildren that week to suitors who'd failed to bring them back. My dad is a native Rhodesian, now Zimbabwe. His ancestors, Huguenots, had fled France during the Reformation when the Huguenots were being killed. My mom's parents were missionaries in Rhodesia and she started dating my dad in high school. When they graduated, my mom came back to the States to go to university. My dad stayed in Rhodesia for a year without her before eventually realizing that he would lose the chance to marry her if he stayed much longer. So, my dad sold all of his cows. My grandpa was a farmer and gave 1 cow to my dad every year for his birthday, which got him enough money for a one-way ticket to New York City. He arrived in Nick in winter wearing shorts and a shirt. He had no idea which state my mom was in, but somehow was able to catch a Greyhound bus and make his way to the city where he thought she'd be. He found her on the day before finals as she was studying. He asked her to marry him and the rest is history. There are so many amazing stories about my dad, but this one always makes me especially proud. That is an excellently stupid plan, but hey, it worked, so props to him. My old man told me a story one time that I really didn't believe until years later when I ran into my uncle who could confirm. Okay, so this was in the early zeros and he and my uncle head down to Miami to do some golfing and, well, mostly some drinking at the bars. It just so happened to be spring break. Now, they didn't know because they're from Canada. They end up getting one of those deals where it's like $50 for a bracelet that lets you drink all you want. So, he's getting a little tipsy and again, can't stress enough, he's from bumfrick nowhere in Canada. Starts shooting the crap with the college girls. I've seen it before and he's insanely good at chatting people up, real people person. So these girls come over and are laughing at his jokes, etc. He starts claiming that he's a rapper from Canada, going off about how he goes by 2 packs a day, smokes, as he tells it, a soft-spoken African-American guy with a bunch of big bodyguard type guys surrounding him comes over and asks to sit down beside my old man and my uncle. The bodyguards leave and they shoot the crap for the whole time at the bar. My dad, pounding drinks back, and this guy, somehow was able to smoke joints at the bar the whole time. He finds out from one of the college girls who were hanging around that the guy was someone named Snoop Dogg, who he does not recognize at all. Again, bumfrick nowhere Canada. They hang out all day, go skinny dipping together for free t-shirts, and he doesn't think anything of this guy. Cut to a couple years later. I'm watching Old School on the TV and my old man is on the computer in the other end of the room. He goes, "Who the frick is that?" I'm like, "Who? Will Ferrell know the guy with the mic?" Flabbergasted, I tell him that Snoop Dogg, one of the most famous rappers of all time. He proceeds to tell me this story about how that guy is just the nicest dude ever. They talked about home renovations and raising kids the whole time. I thought he'd lost it until I brought it up around my uncle. He knew the whole time and didn't bring it up because he thought if my dad knew who that guy was, he'd scare him off. Totally weird. He's got a billion stories like that. A real good one about getting banned from public transit in all of British Columbia for a decade. Anyways, for another time. He grew up in the segregated South, graduated from an all-white high school and all that. His best friend was Mexican. On Friday nights they went to the black high school's football games wearing sombreros. He played football with some of the guys from that team on the weekends, too. I found out about all this from the father of a classmate who had played ball with him. He actually got in fights with other white kids because of his associations. Picturing a white guy and a Mexican guy in sombreros and ponchos at an all-black football game in the 50s or 60s. Can't even handle this right now. He was a terror as a kid. When he was 10 or so, he'd ride his bike around and collect soda bottles to get the deposit back. He would only return them to one certain store. Because he knew the opening clerk there immediately put the bottles out back for the closer to deal with. He'd go back during shift change and take the bottles from behind the store. Then a couple hours later, he'd return the same bottles to the closing clerk. At least he spent most of the deposit money in that same store. On the bright side, he taught me to be mindful of pattern thinking and use it to my advantage. When he was camping with his buddies, he took a fistful of shrooms and decided to run as fast as he could in a straight line until he hit a tree. Another time he almost started a forest fire and tried to put it out by peeing on it. We've bonded over our mutual appreciation of the outdoors. He dropped out of school in 4th grade to work on the family farm. Then at 12 he left his country of Nepal to work in India. He left there with the same employer who took him to India to Australia when he was 18. And from there with the same employer went to Cali in the late 80s. Stayed there for 3 years. Then moved cross country to Baltimore in 1991. Alone. Stayed there for 3 years and left to Northern Virginia after being held at gunpoint thrice while running a pizza bolis. Then after 1 year in VA, he went to Nepal, got married, came back, and has been living in Nova ever since. Tough life, good man. What an excellent outing for the word thrice. My dad started reading the Harry Potter books with me so that we could have something to talk about together. This is girl Pepe, she only appears once in every 50,000 memes, like in 3 seconds for good luck. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.